Hashtag the funeral I attended alive. I attended my own funeral on a Tuesday. It was a beautiful service, really. The flowers were expensive, white lilies, my supposed favorite, though I've always preferred sunflowers. The casket was mahogany with gold handles. The program had a lovely photo of me from 3 years ago, back when I still remembered how to smile without it hurting. 67 people came to mourn me. I counted. I stood behind an oak tree at the edge of the cemetery, wearing a wig and sunglasses I'd bought at a costume shop, sipping coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. And I watched. I watched my mother weep into my father's shoulder. I watched my colleagues from work dab their eyes with tissues. I watched my best friend, a pony, collapse against her husband, unable to stand. And I watched my sister check her phone during the eulogy. That's when I knew I had made the right decision. My name is Ayanna Blackwood. I am 38 years old. I am the founder and CEO of a construction and land development company that employs 217 people. I own a 4-bedroom house in a gated community, drive a Mercedes that I paid for in cash, and have an investment portfolio that would make my accountant weep with joy. On paper, I am a success story. In reality, I am an ATM with a heartbeat. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the beginning of my success, the beginning of my servitude. I was born the second of 5 children to Hoda and Wachuri Blackwood on a small reservation in South Dakota. My father was a schoolteacher. My mother sold handmade crafts and provisions from a small trading post attached to our house. We were not poor, but we were not comfortable. There was always enough food, but never enough extra. Always enough uniforms for school, but never enough for the field trips that cost money. I learned early that I was different from my siblings. My older brother, Chaitan, was the golden child. The firstborn son in a traditional family. His name means falcon, and from the moment he arrived, everyone treated him like he was meant to soar above the rest of us. He got the biggest portions at dinner. He got the new shoes while we wore hand-me-downs. He got the praise for merely existing. My younger sister, Winona, was the beauty. Light-skinned, with our grandmother's cheekbones and a smile that could charm snakes. She learned early that pretty girls don't need to work hard. She learned that tears could get her anything. She learned that manipulation was just another word for survival. Then there was Koanna, the quiet one, lost somewhere in the middle, never causing trouble, never being noticed. And finally, Kimmy, the baby, born when I was 12, a surprise that my mother called a blessing and my father called an expense. And then there was me. Ayanna. The name means eternal blossom. But I think they chose it wrong. I should have been named something that meant the one who carries. Because that's what I've done my entire life. I carry. I was 7 years old when I started helping my mother at the trading post. Not because she asked, because I noticed she was tired. I noticed the way she rubbed her lower back after standing all day. I noticed the dark circles under her eyes that never seemed to fade. So I started coming straight home from school to help. I learned to count change before I learned to do fractions. I learned to negotiate with suppliers before I learned to negotiate with friends. I learned that my value in this family was not in being loved, it was in being useful. My siblings noticed too. They noticed that when they needed pocket money, they could ask Ayanna. When they needed someone to cover for them, they could count on Ayanna. When they needed someone to take the blame, to absorb the punishment, to smooth things over with our parents, Ayanna was there. Always Ayanna. I didn't mind. Not at first. I told myself that this was what family meant. This was what love looked like. You give and give and give until there's nothing left, and somehow, magically, you're supposed to be refilled by the gratitude of others. Except the gratitude never came. Only more requests. I was 16 when I made a decision that would define my life. I was sitting in my father's classroom, he taught at the high school I attended, watching him explain compound interest to a room full of bored teenagers. And something clicked in my brain. Not about the math. About the future. I understood, with sudden and terrible clarity, that no one was coming to save us. No rich uncle was going to appear from California with suitcases full of money. No government program was going to lift us out of our circumstances. No miracle was going to descend from the sky and hand my family the life they deserved. If we were going to rise, someone had to build the ladder. And I decided that someone would be me. I threw myself into my studies with an intensity that frightened my teachers and annoyed my siblings. While Chayton chased girls and Winona chased attention, I chased grades. I finished high school at the top of my class. I won a partial scholarship to the University of Arizona. I worked 3 jobs during university: tutoring, selling snacks, doing laundry for richer students, to cover what the scholarship didn't. I graduated with honors in business administration. And then I started climbing. My first job was at a construction company. Entry level. Terrible pay. A boss who took credit for my ideas and yelled at me when his own failed. I lasted 18 months before I quit, not to rest, but to start my own company. I was 24 years old. I had saved exactly $47,000. I had a business plan I had written during lunch breaks. I had a contact at a development firm who believed in me enough to give me my first contract. And I had a family who immediately started calculating what my success meant for them. The requests began before I had even turned a profit. Chayton needed money to start a business of his own. He had a plan, he said. A sure thing. He just needed $20,000 to get started. I gave it to him. The business failed within 6 months. He never paid me back. He never even said thank you. Winona needed tuition for the design school she had decided to attend. She couldn't possibly work and study at the same time, she was too delicate for that. I paid for 2 years before she dropped out to marry a man she'd met at a bar. Koana needed capital for a ranching venture. Then he needed more capital when the first season failed. Then he needed a loan to pay off the debts from the failed ranch. Then he needed help with the interest on the loan. The cycle never ended. And Kimmy, sweet, youngest Kimmy, needed everything. School fees. Uniforms. Books. Medical bills when she got sick. A laptop when she started university. Rent when she moved to the city. Money for food when her rent ate up her allowance. I gave it all. I gave until my savings account looked like a war zone. I gave until I had to take loans against my own company to meet their demands. I gave until I forgot what it felt like to spend money on myself without guilt. And the more I gave, the more they expected. That's the thing about generosity. It's like a drug. The recipients build up a tolerance. What once seemed like an incredible gift becomes the baseline. They need more and more to feel the same high. And if you dare to reduce the dosage, if you dare to suggest that maybe, just maybe, you have limits too, they look at you like you've betrayed them. Like you've stolen something that was rightfully theirs. Like your money was never really your money at all. By the time I was 30, my company was worth over $50 million. We had contracts with major corporations and tribal nations. We had expanded to 3 states. We had been featured in business magazines as a success story, the reservation girl who built an empire. And I was drowning. Not financially. Financially, I was fine, as long as I kept working 16-hour days, as long as I kept pushing, as long as I never slowed down long enough to realize how exhausted I was. I was drowning in obligations. My father needed surgery. I paid. My mother needed a new house, the old one was falling apart, she said, and didn't she deserve to live in comfort after all those years of sacrifice? I built her a house. Chayton's children needed school fees. I paid. Winona's husband left her, and she needed money to get back on her feet, a process that had been ongoing for 4 years with no end in sight. Kohana's new business needed investment. Kimmy's boyfriend needed a loan that Kimmy guaranteed with my money. They called me the family backbone. They said it with pride. With admiration. With a tone that suggested I should be grateful for the title. They didn't realize that backbones can break. The tipping point came 3 months before I died. Not literally died, of course. But the version of me that existed before that night, she died. She had to. There was nothing left of her to save. It was a Friday. I had just closed a deal that would bring in $5 million over the next year. I should have been celebrating. Instead, I was sitting in my empty house, staring at a text message from my sister. Ayana, I need $5,000 before Monday. Don't ask questions. Just send it. $5,000. No please. No explanation. No acknowledgement that she had borrowed, and never repaid, over $800,000 from me over the past decade. Just send it. Like I was a bank. Like I was a machine. Like I existed solely to process her requests. I typed back, Winona, I'm stretched thin this month. Can we talk about this? Her response came in seconds. You just closed a huge deal. Everyone knows. Don't pretend you don't have it. This is for your nieces, Ayana. Do you want them to suffer because you're being selfish? Selfish. The word hit me like a slap. I had sacrificed my 20s building a company. I had sacrificed my relationships. I was 35 and had never had a partnership that lasted more than a year because I was always too busy, too tired, too consumed by the needs of others. I had sacrificed my health. My doctor had been warning me about my blood pressure for years. I had sacrificed my peace. I couldn't remember the last time I had gone a full week without a family crisis demanding my attention and my wallet. And I was selfish. Because I hesitated to give away another $5,000 to a sister who had never once asked how I was doing. I sent the money. Of course I did. I always sent the money. But something cracked inside me that night. A small fracture that would soon become a chasm. The following month was a parade of disasters. Chetan called to inform me that he was getting divorced. His wife wanted half of everything, including the house I had helped him buy. Could I contribute to his legal fees? Just a few $100,000 to start. He was family, after all. Blood is thicker than water. My father fell and broke his hip. He needed surgery, rehabilitation, a live-in nurse. My mother called me crying, saying I was the only one who could help. Of course I was. I was always the only one who could help. The others couldn't help because they had already spent everything I had given them. Kohana's wife called, not Koana himself, because Koana had never learned to ask for things directly when he could send a proxy. She said they needed money for their daughter's wedding. The groom's family expected a celebration that would cost only $200,000. Could I help? Wouldn't I want my niece to have a beautiful wedding? And Kimmy, my youngest sibling, the one I had practically raised, the one I had sent to the best schools, the one I had believed was different from the others, Kimmy called to tell me she was pregnant. By a man who was already married. To someone else. She wasn't calling to confess or to seek advice. She was calling because she needed money for the situation. She wouldn't say the word. She just kept saying the situation like it was a business expense. Like it was a line item in the budget of my life. I sat in my office after that call, staring at the wall, trying to remember the last time someone from my family had called me just to talk. Just to ask how I was. Just to say they were thinking of me without needing anything in return. I couldn't remember. Not a single time. In 35 years of being the family backbone, not one of them had ever stopped to ask if the backbone was okay. Not one of them had ever offered to carry me for a change. Not one of them had ever treated me as anything other than a resource to be depleted. And I was so tired. So impossibly, unbearably tired. I looked at my calendar. I had a board meeting in the morning. A site visit in the afternoon. A charity dinner in the evening. Then a flight to Denver the next day. Then more meetings. More deals. More work. And in between all of that, I was expected to manage my father's recovery, fund Chetan's divorce, finance a wedding I hadn't been invited to, and help Kimmy deal with the situation. I put my head down on my desk. And I made a decision. If they could only see my value when I was giving them something. Then I wanted to see what would happen when I stopped. I spent 4 weeks planning my own death. Not a real death, I wasn't that far gone, not yet. But a staged disappearance. A controlled experiment to answer the question that had been haunting me for years: did my family love me, or did they love what I could give them? The logistics were complex. I was a CEO, after all. I couldn't just vanish without creating chaos. So I planned carefully. I promoted my deputy, Dakota, to acting CEO. Told him I was taking an extended medical leave due to stress-related health issues. Not entirely a lie. I drafted a will, updated my beneficiaries, created a trust that would manage my assets in my absence. I wanted to see what they would do when they thought the money was frozen, inaccessible, gone along with me. Then I called my best friend, Aponi. Aponi was the one person in my life who had never asked me for money. She had known me since university, had watched me build my company from nothing, had held me while I cried about my family more times than I could count. She was the only person I trusted with the truth. "I need you to help me fake my death," I said. There was a long pause. "Ayana, are you okay?" "No," I said. "I haven't been okay for years. But I'm about to find out if there's anyone in my family who loves me enough to deserve my recovery." I explained my plan. Aponi listened. When I finished, she didn't tell me I was crazy. She didn't try to talk me out of it. She just said, "What do you need me to do?" That's how I knew she really loved me. We staged a car accident. A crash on a remote road late at night. My car was found overturned near a river. My purse, my phone, my shoes, all recovered from the scene. But my body was swept away by the current. They searched for 3 days before declaring me presumed dead. I watched the news coverage from a hotel room in Portugal. I watched them interview my crying mother, my devastated father, my siblings whose faces were arranged in what they believed was grief. I watched Winona give a tearful statement about how much she missed her sister, her best friend, her rock. Best friend. She hadn't called me just to talk in over 2 years. Rock. The only time she used that word was when she needed money. I opened a bottle of wine and waited to see what would happen next. The first week was chaos. My family wailed. They posted tributes on social media. They gave interviews about what a wonderful person I was, how generous, how kind, how selfless. The words I had wanted to hear my entire life, they finally said them. But only to journalists. Only when I wasn't there to hear. I read every post. I saved every quote. My sister was the most giving person I knew, Winona wrote. She would do anything for her family. Anything. Yes, I thought. That was the problem. By the second week, the grief began to shift. My mother called Aponi, who was managing my estate in my absence, to ask about the house. She wanted to know if she could move in. It was sitting empty, after all. It seemed wasteful to let it rot. Chaitan called about my company. He had ideas for how it should be run. He thought he should be involved. He was family, after all. Who better to protect my legacy than my own brother? Winona called about the will. She wanted to know how much she was getting. She needed to plan for her children's future. Koana didn't call. He showed up at my house with a moving truck, trying to claim furniture that I had apparently promised him years ago. Aponi had to threaten to call the police. And Kimmy, sweet, youngest Kimmy, posted on social media that she was pregnant and that her late sister would have been so happy to be an aunt. She included a link to a crowdfunding page for Ayana's niece or nephew. She was monetizing my death. They all were. I had been dead for 2 weeks, and already they were dividing my corpse like vultures fighting over carrion. I sat in my hotel room and laughed until I cried. Then I cried until I couldn't anymore. Then I opened my notebook and started writing. Everything I had seen. Everything I had heard. Everything I was about to do. I came back for my funeral. Not to reveal myself. Not yet. I came to watch. To see who my family really was when they thought I couldn't see them anymore. The service was at the church I had funded the renovation for 3 years prior. The pastor, whose children's school fees I had paid, gave a beautiful sermon about sacrifice and love and eternal life. He spoke about me as if he had known me. He hadn't. He had known my checkbook. The mourners gathered afterward at my mother's house. The house I had built her. The one with the generator I had bought and the furniture I had selected and the kitchen appliances I had imported because she had seen them in a magazine and mentioned, once, that they were nice. I watched through the window. I watched my mother, who was supposed to be devastated, laughing at a joke my uncle told. I watched Chayton, who was supposed to be mourning his sister, negotiating with a lawyer about the company's shares. I watched Winona, who was supposed to be destroyed by grief, trying on my jewelry with her friends in the bedroom. I watched Koana loading boxes into his car, boxes from my house that he had somehow gotten access to. And I watched Kimmy, 7 months pregnant, eating my food and smiling for photos like this was a party and not a funeral. The only person who seemed genuinely broken was my father. He sat in a corner, alone, staring at a photo of me from when I was 12 years old. He didn't eat. He didn't speak. He just sat there, holding that photo, looking like a man whose world had ended. He was the only one. I wanted to go to him. I wanted to tell him I was alive. I wanted to hold him and tell him I was sorry for putting him through this. But I couldn't. Not yet. The experiment wasn't over. I needed to see what would happen when the money ran out. The reading of the will happened 1 week after the funeral. I had designed it specifically for this moment. Aponi was the executor, the only person who knew the truth. She gathered everyone in my lawyer's office and read the document I had written with surgical precision. My assets would be managed by a trust for 5 years. No one would receive any direct payments. Instead, the trust would pay for necessities, housing, medical care, children's education, but only with documented proof of need. No cash handouts. No blank checks. No more endless wells of money appearing whenever someone asked. The trust would also conduct an audit of all the money I had given my family over the years. Any funds that had been misused or misrepresented would be deducted from future benefits. In other words, if they had lied to get money from me, it was coming out of their inheritance. Aponi told me later that the room erupted. Winona screamed that she had been robbed. Chayton threatened to contest the will. My mother wept and said I had betrayed the family. Koana stormed out. Only my father and Kimmy remained silent, my father because he was still too broken to speak, and Kimmy because she was doing mental math, trying to figure out how much trouble she was in. The audit began immediately. What it uncovered was worse than I had imagined. Winona had been telling me for years that she needed money for her children's school fees. The children attended a local school that cost a fraction of what she claimed. She had been pocketing the difference, nearly $400,000 over 6 years. Chayton's failed business? He had never actually started it. He had used the money I gave him as a down payment on a second house, for his mistress. Kohana's ranching venture had been legitimate, but he had been skimming profits and telling me the business was failing. He had made money. He just hadn't wanted to share it or repay me. And Kimmy, sweet, innocent Kimmy, had been running a small fraud operation at university, using my name and reputation to solicit donations for a charity that didn't exist. The total amount of money that had been stolen, misused, or misrepresented. $6.2 million. $6.2 million. I could have built a community center with that money. I could have funded 100 scholarships. I could have bought myself a life, a real life, with rest and peace and time to breathe. Instead, I had funded lies. I had broken my back carrying people who were picking my pockets while I held them. I revealed myself 3 months after the funeral. I could have waited longer. Could have let them suffer more. Could have watched from a distance as the trust slowly choked off their access to my money and they turned on each other like starving dogs. But that wasn't the point. The point was never revenge. The point was truth. I wanted them to see themselves clearly. I wanted them to understand what they had done. And I wanted to see, once and for all, if any of them were capable of change. I called a family meeting at my mother's house. Aponi arranged it, telling them it was about the trust. They all came, of course. When there's money involved, they always come. I walked in at exactly 2 p.m. The sound my mother made when she saw me will stay with me forever. A scream that was half terror, half joy, half something else entirely, something that might have been guilt. My father rose from his chair like a man witnessing a resurrection. He crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled me into his arms, weeping. Just weeping. No words. Just the sound of a father holding a daughter he thought he had lost. I held him back. He was the only one I held. The others stared. Winona's face cycled through confusion, hope, and then, when she realized what this meant, fear. Chaitan's jaw was tight. Koana was already calculating. Kimmy burst into tears, though I couldn't tell if they were relief or panic. "I'm not dead," I said, gently pulling back from my father. "I was never dead. I staged the accident. I watched the funeral. I've been watching all of you for 3 months." Silence. The kind of silence that has weight. "I know about the jewelry, Winona. I know about the mistress, Chaitan. I know about the skimming, Koana. And I know about the charity fraud, Kimmy." More silence. Heavier now. "I have records of everything. Every lie. Every theft. Every time you looked me in the face and told me you loved me while reaching into my pocket." Winona found her voice first. Of course she did. She had always been the fastest to defend herself. "Ayana, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. I understand that I have given this family over $8 million over the past 15 years. I understand that at least $6 million of that was stolen or misused. I understand that none of you, not one, ever asked how I was doing. Ever offered to help me. Ever treated me as anything other than a source of income. That's not fair," my mother said. "We love you. We're your family. Everything we did because we needed." Needed, I repeated. That's the key word, isn't it? You needed. You always needed. And I always gave. Until there was nothing left of me but the giving. I pulled out a folder. Inside were documents I had prepared with my lawyer. Copies of everything. The fake receipts. The forged signatures. The fraudulent charity paperwork. The evidence of Chaitan's hidden assets. "This is not a negotiation," I said. "This is an accounting. I am telling you what you did. And I am telling you what happens next." "What happens next?" Chaitan's voice was sharp. Defensive. "You're going to turn us in? Your own family?" "That depends on you." I laid out my terms. The money that had been stolen would be repaid. Not immediately, I knew they didn't have it. But over time. Payment plans. Documentation. Accountability. The trust would remain in place, but its purpose would change. It would no longer fund their lifestyles. It would fund education, real education, with verified enrollments. It would fund medical care, real medical care, with verified treatments. It would fund nothing else. And the family dynamic would change. I was no longer the backbone. I was no longer the ATM. I was no longer the one who gave and gave while everyone else took. If they wanted a relationship with me, a real relationship, not a financial one, they would have to earn it. They would have to prove that they saw me as a person, not a resource. And if they couldn't do that, then they would lose me for real this time. "You can't do this," Winona said. "We're family. Blood is thicker than water. You can't just. Blood is thicker than water, I agreed. But you know what's thicker than blood? Respect. Integrity. Basic human decency. And you've given me none of those things. I turned to leave. Ayana, wait. It was my father. He had been silent throughout my entire speech. Now he stood, his eyes still wet, his voice shaking. I never asked you for anything. I never took from you. I looked at him. And for the first time in months, I felt something other than anger. I know, Papa. You never did. Then let me ask you for something now. Let me ask you to stay. Not forever. Just for dinner. Just so so I can tell you things I should have said years ago. I hesitated. Please, Ayana. I lost you once. I cannot lose you again. I stayed for dinner. But I didn't stay for the others. I stayed for him. Recovery was not a straight line. Some of them rose to the challenge. My father became my closest friend in the year after my resurrection. We talked every week. Real conversations. Not about money, about life, about regrets, about the future. He apologized for not protecting me better. For not seeing what was happening. For being too weak to stand against my mother and siblings when they treated me like a bank. I should have said something, he told me one afternoon. I watched them drain you, and I said nothing. I thought that was love. Letting family take what they need. It's not love, I said. It's exploitation dressed up as love. There's a difference. Kimmy surprised me. Maybe it was the pregnancy, the impending reality of motherhood, but something shifted in her. She called me 2 months after the confrontation. Not to ask for money. To apologize. I didn't see it, she said. I grew up watching everyone take from you, and I thought that was normal. I thought that was what you were for. And I'm so sorry, Ayana. I'm so sorry I never saw you as a person. She started the repayment plan. Small amounts, she didn't have much, but consistent. And she started calling just to talk. About the baby. About her fears. About how she was going to be a better mother than our mother had been. I'm cautiously hopeful about Kimmy. The others were less successful. Chaitan refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. He called the whole thing a misunderstanding and suggested that I was being emotional and vindictive. When I didn't back down, he stopped speaking to me entirely. I haven't heard from him in 8 months. I don't miss him. Winona oscillated between rage and manipulation. She sent me long messages about how I was destroying the family with my selfishness. She tried to turn our mother against me. She even attempted to contest the trust in court, a case she lost spectacularly, incurring legal fees she couldn't afford and forcing her to sell the house I had helped her buy. I felt nothing when I heard about that. No guilt. No satisfaction. Just nothing. She had made her choice. I had made mine. Koana faded. He moved to a smaller town, stopped returning calls, stopped engaging with any of us. I think he was ashamed, not enough to apologize, but enough to disappear. That was his version of accountability. I accepted it. And my mother. My mother was the hardest. She didn't steal from me directly. She just enabled everyone else to do it. She created the culture. She taught my siblings that my success existed for their benefit. She was the one who called me the family backbone, like it was a compliment instead of a curse. We talked, eventually. A long, painful conversation that lasted 4 hours and left both of us crying. I thought I was doing the right thing, she said. I thought family meant sharing everything. I thought your success was a gift from the Creator for all of us. It wasn't a gift, I said. It was my work. My sacrifice. My life. And you let them take it from me piece by piece. I'm sorry, Ayana. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. She's trying. I can see her trying. She calls me without asking for anything. She asks about my day, my work, my health. She's learning to see me as her daughter instead of her provider. But the trust between us is fractured. Maybe permanently. Maybe time will heal it. Maybe it won't. I've made my peace with the uncertainty. Because for the first time in my life, I'm not carrying the weight of expectations I never agreed to. I'm not funding dreams that aren't mine. I'm not sacrificing my health, my happiness, my future for people who can't even see me clearly. I am just Ayana. And that is finally enough. I'm 40 years old now. 2 years have passed since my resurrection. The company is thriving. Dakota turned out to be a better CEO than I ever was, and I've stepped back to a chairman role that lets me work reasonable hours for the first time in my adult life. I bought a new house. Smaller than the old one, but entirely mine. No guest rooms for family members who overstay their welcome. No extra spaces for obligations I didn't ask for. Just me, my books, my garden, and a guest suite for the people who have earned the right to be there. A pony comes over every Sunday. We cook together, drink wine, talk about everything and nothing. She saved my life, not by helping me fake my death, but by being the one person who loved me without conditions. I will never be able to repay that. She says she doesn't want me to. You're not an ATM to me, she said once. You're my sister. The one I chose. That meant more than any amount of money ever could. I started therapy 6 months after the confrontation. Not because I was broken, though I was, in many ways, but because I wanted to understand how I had allowed myself to be used for so long. How I had internalized the message that my worth was tied to my utility. How I had sacrificed myself so completely that I forgot there was anything left to save. It's slow work. Painful work. But important. My therapist asked me once why I had chosen to stage my death instead of simply cutting my family off. I needed to see, I told her. I needed to see with my own eyes who they really were. I needed to remove all doubt. Because if I had just walked away, I would have spent the rest of my life wondering if I was wrong. If I was being too harsh. If maybe, just maybe, they really did love me. And now, she asked. Do you still wonder? I thought about the funeral. About Winona checking her phone during the eulogy. About Chayton negotiating with lawyers before my casket was cold. About my mother moving on so quickly while my father sat alone with a photograph. No, I said. I don't wonder anymore. That certainty, that hard, cold, unshakable certainty, was worth everything I went through to get it. Because now I know. I know who loves me. I know who uses me. I know the difference between family and obligation, between loyalty and exploitation, between love and need. And I know that I am allowed to choose myself. That was the lesson my family never wanted me to learn. That was the truth they hid behind phrases like, blood is thicker than water, and family comes first, and we're all we have. We're not all we have. I have myself. I have the people who choose to love me without conditions. I have a life that I built with my own hands, and I refuse to let anyone tear it down ever again. There's an old saying among my people. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. For most of my life, I was the one being borrowed from. I was the one giving life, to my family, to their dreams, to their endless needs. And I was so proud of that role. So convinced that my value lay in my generosity. So certain that if I just gave enough, loved enough, sacrificed enough, I would finally earn my place at the fire. But you know what I've learned? You can't earn a place you're not actually welcome at. You can't buy love from people who only know how to take. And you can't sacrifice yourself into belonging somewhere you were never meant to stay. Some families are like the river. They nurture you. They help you grow. They celebrate your strength and support you through your droughts. Other families are like the strip mine. They extract from you, They dig deeper and deeper until there's nothing left. They call it love, but it's just resource management. I grew up in a mine. I didn't know any different. I thought the exhaustion was normal. I thought the emptiness was just the price of love. I thought that one day, if I gave enough, the mine would transform into a river. It doesn't work that way. Some ground is too poisoned to grow anything good. But here's the beautiful truth I discovered on the other side of my own funeral: you can leave the mine. You can find new ground. You can plant yourself somewhere that actually wants to see you flourish. And when you do, when you finally stop giving yourself away to people who only see you as a commodity, you discover something miraculous. You discover that you are enough. That you always were. That your worth is not measured by what you provide, but by who you are. I am Ayanna Blackwood. I am not a backbone. I am not an ATM. I am not a resource to be managed. I am a woman who built an empire while carrying the weight of an entire family on her shoulders. A woman who loved so hard that she almost destroyed herself. A woman who had to die to learn how to live. And I am finally free.